The story begins back in 1998. I'm just kidding. Hello, you wonderful people. Welcome back to the channel. How are you guys doing? Today I'm going to be spilling all of the tea on how I moved out of my parents' house and how I convinced my strict Indian parents to let me do so in the first place. I am actually making this video in hopes that some of you might find it helpful, because when I first moved out, and this was back in 2016 I believe, after about a year of living by myself, I wrote a blog post on a blog I used to have back then, and somebody on Instagram recently reached out to me with a message saying that they found my blog somewhere on WordPress and that they were really grateful that I had written it, and they wanted their parents to read it so that this girl, she could potentially move out and convince her parents to let her do so. So I'm going to link that blog somewhere here, and it has all of the reasoning for why I kind of wanted to do this in the first place. But today itself I'm going to give you like a brief overview of why I wanted to move out, where it was coming from. That blog is very like PG-13, it doesn't have any sauce, but as with any familial situation, there is always drama in situations like these. I don't know when the origin of this thought process came for me, but what I do know is that even as a kid, I always wanted to live independently, and at that time it had nothing to do with my parents. It was just like this innate desire that had always been there, and I don't know why. Once my parent took me to this hostel school sort of thing in Assam somewhere, because they had to meet a colleague of my dad's, and I fell in love with the place. Like the whole concept of living in a hostel, and I was, I think, in the 5th standard then. So yeah, that's how far back this goes. But in the most recent past, it started to get fueled by a couple of different things. The first one was my dad being very conservative, very authoritative, and what that usually led to was him imposing a lot of restrictions, even though I had started working. And for the first few years I was working as a journalist, which meant I had really odd hours when it came to coming back home from office, because when you work in a newspaper, you by default have a night shift, right? And that was turning out to be a huge problem for him. I used to get scolded on every little thing. And whenever like our arguments got heated, and it went up to a point where he gave me an ultimatum that this is my house, it's my rules, so if you want to live here, you have to abide by my rules. And that was kind of the trigger for all of this thing for me wanting to move out in the first place. This answerability that I had, even when it came to simple things like work, that freedom was being restricted. So that was like a huge thing for me. And then coupled with that, I started interacting with a lot of my friends, like in office and outside, and these are friends who had lived away from home, so like who migrated to a different city either in college or for work, and their relationship with their parents had evolved very differently. Like their parents now saw them as adults instead of just seeing them as kids, which is what was happening in my case, honestly. I think that's the thing with a lot of Indian familial setups also. Like it's very difficult for parents to see you as well-functioning adults up until the point that you get married, which is very weird. Like the concept is very weird to me, but that is how it happens apparently. And it did not happen that way for kids who had, for people who had moved out of their house for college or for jobs. And I live in Delhi, man. I went to Delhi University and I got a job in Delhi, and I didn't want to move out. I love the city. So like I didn't want to move to another city just so I could move out of my house, you know. And that was, I think, where this other sort of thought process started stemming from, because that is the kind of relationship that I wanted to have with my parents. For them to see me as a well-functioning adult who can take care of herself, who can take care of responsibilities, and who doesn't really need to depend on dad's money or husband's money to thrive, survive, whatever. And the third thing was that there was shadi pressure like building up at home. So I decided to take this step when I was, I think, 20, like getting to 25 years old. It was almost on the cusp of my 25th birthday. That's when I decided to do this. And by that time, of course कि शादी कर लो, उम्र हो जाएगी, all of that jazz had also started happening. So yeah, like all of these things combined, and I knew that if I didn't take this step now, my life would look very, very different from how I wanted it to look. And so one afternoon, like this is when I was in between jobs. I had quit at India Today and I was joining this other place called Mayapuri. They were paying well, and then I really just wanted to step out and be my own person. And so I broke this conversation with my mom, and love her. She was supportive from day one. And I think a lot of that stems from the fact that she never got to do this. She went directly from, staying with my nana and graduating from college and then right away getting married, which I think took away a lot of that independence that comes with living alone, which is also like the reason why I wanted to do this in the first place, right? So she was very supportive from the get-go, although she was a little emotional that I wanted to leave her and go, but overall she was very, very supportive, and I loved that. So now the only thing left to do was convince my dad. So I decided to go talk to him, but I didn't know how to start that conversation, and like I got a trigger point. I remember it was like Kismet. My dad had come home for Chitti, like he was posted somewhere else and he'd come home for one of his like vacation trips, and again like one of these shadi discussions started happening, and I was like, I'm not ready to get married yet and I don't want to do that, blah blah blah. It turned into a heated debate, and that's when he once again said, this is my house. If you want to live here, you live by my rules, or you don't live here. And I was like, yeah, fine, I'm not going to live here, I am going to move out. And that was like a very abrupt way to do this, but I think that was also a good segue, because that kind of hit the point home that I did not need to depend on him anymore to kind of be my own person. And of course, I didn't just like pack my bags and run away. So after that, when things cooled down, I went to him like a mature adult and had this conversation again. It took a couple of tries, a couple of conversations, a couple of fights to actually get him on board, but he was not completely there. So there were two other tools in my arsenal that I deployed. That is how my mind worked at that time. The first one was actually convincing a friend of mine to shift with me so that we would be living together. And this friend was a family friend. So like my parents knew her parents, and they had been friends before we were even friends. So like there was this huge trust factor, and she was moving to Delhi from another city. And I was like, hey, we already are moving here. You're going to be living by yourself. How about we live together? And she agreed, and that is the trust thing that I pitched to my parents, and that gave them like a sense of security, and they were like, oh yeah, okay, this works. This might just work out, So that was step one. The second thing that I did was I picked a place which was very close to home, so about 4 or 5 kilometers away, which meant that I could actually reach my parents' place within like 10 to 15 minutes if the need arose. So those were the two important factors that kind of convinced my dad completely to be on board with this. Though the reason why I spent so much time like doing this back and forth and having these discussions and conversations, because I did not want to leave things on a bad foot. Like I could have just packed my bags and moved out, but that is not what I wanted to do, because I did not like them, my parents, right? I don't want to spoil my relationship with them. And that is why having this back and forth, this discussion, which was super uncomfortable by the way, because to convince somebody else to do something that you want, even though you don't need to convince them. Because I had already been working for a couple of years, like I've been working for 4 years at this point. And although I was very bad with saving and investing during this phase, like before this phase, when I actually decided to take the leap, I understood that I needed to save money, and I needed money for rent and paying upfront for the security deposit, all of those things. But anyways, in the end, it all actually worked out, and within a couple of months, I was ready. Packed my bags, ready. I found a flat very close to home. And at that time, I absolutely loved that place, even though in hindsight, it was a horrendous place to live. It was, those 1 BHK flats that come, like completely on the rooftop. and it was so hot during the summers. For the first couple of weeks we didn't have an air conditioner and we were just boiling. Me and my friend used to come back home from office and you were like but I only stayed there for like 6 months because then my friend got homesick and she decided to move back to her hometown, and that kind of left me dangling in the wind. But I figured out things, moved into another place. I decided not to go back home to my parents' place at this point in time, because if I had done so, this whole endeavor would have like fallen flat on its face, and I did not want that. So I shifted in with another friend who had a house in Delhi and who was living by herself, and her parents won't let her live by herself because she was alone. You see what I'm talking about? I don't know why this happens, man. This is so different from how things happen in the West, where you're 18 and your parents expect you to move out and live by yourself, as compared to here, where I don't know, for some people they never do this, they never live independently. And I think this is so important. Like, this should be such a fundamental part of your growth and development, because living by yourself will teach you things that no other thing can, from dealing with landlords and dealing with weird people to kind of managing a house on your own and handling responsibilities and ensuring that you have food on your table and ensuring that you are able to take care of yourself and the people who are living with you. Sometimes you can't learn all of this if you've never been exposed to it, which is why I think, like, even in the Indian familial setup, for people it should be like a fundamental thing to live by themselves before they get married and start living with somebody else. Because if you can't take responsibility for your own self, how are you expected to take responsibility for another person altogether? So yeah, and that's how I ended up doing this. So I lived for 3-4 years by myself, and then some shit happened in my family when my mom and my brother ended up moving in with me. This was like right on the cusp of COVID. So since then, all 3 of us have been living together. After that phase, after 4 years of living by myself, that kind of made me this adult in their eyes. And now, even though we live together, there's a sense of boundary. All of us respect each other's boundaries. There is a sense of treating each other as mature adults and not treating me and my brother as kids anymore. So that was a very fundamental shift that I don't think would have happened if I hadn't taken that step. And yeah, I do plan to go back to living by myself pretty soon as this thing at home gets sorted. So yeah, that's how I convinced my parents. And if you are planning to do something similar, or if you want to move out and you want to talk to your parents, I hope this video can be helpful. If there's one thing that you should take away from this, is that sometimes to do the things that you want to do, you need to have uncomfortable conversations. But in order to have those uncomfortable conversations and to stand your footing, you need to have a base. For me, financial independence was that base. Having a job that was paying me well enough that I could move out was that base. So if that is not the case with you, and you cannot afford to live by yourself, and also your parents won't allow, you don't have much of a choice, right? So the first step in such a situation will be finding a way to pay for your own life, for your lifestyle, for your bills, your expenses, so that when you decide to take this step, you actually don't have to depend on anybody else. And like, even if that conversation goes south, even if that discussion goes south and somebody is being very restrictive in terms of allowing you, you can take that step by yourself. I know that I would have done that if the discussion didn't pan out the way that it did. But luckily I didn't have to, and I'm very grateful for that. The other thing is that if you do want to do something like this, you have to be very sure that you do want to do this. Just going on a whim and saying, hey, I want to move out is a different thing, but actually planning to do it, living by yourself, understanding how this scenario works is a whole different ballgame altogether, because there will be times during this whole ordeal when you feel alone, when you don't know how to take care of yourself, when you know that shit is going to hit the fan, and you won't be able to get through all of that if you yourself are not very sure that you want to do this in the first place. So yeah, that was it for this video. I hope that you found it helpful. If any parents are watching it, namaskar. I hope you get an insight into the minds of your children and why they want to do this. I wanted to do this because I wanted to live independently. I wanted to take responsibility for myself and not have to depend on like external, which is like my parents and or a husband, to manage my own life. And this way I was also not answerable to anybody else, and that in my opinion is a huge thing, because the sense of freedom that comes with not being answerable to anybody else is unparalleled. So those were my reasons, and that is how I did it. I hope you found this video helpful. If you want me to cover any other aspects of this part of my life, living independently, costs, how to do it, how to go about adulting, let me know in the comments and I will be happy to do that for you, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!